Hello everyone, my name is Luciana Vázquez and I'm going to talk about Paradise Lost. To begin with, I'm going to present some important aspects about this literary work. Paradise Lost was written by John Milton, a poet and intellectual born on Friday 9 December 1608 in London. It was probably written between the years 1658 and 1663. The first edition of the poem was published in the year 1667 and there were 10 books of the poem. In 1674, the poem was reorganized into 12 books and it was published that year. Milton also incorporated an introductory prose argument as a summary of the plot of the books. So what is Paradise Lost about? Paradise Lost is a long narrative poem based on the book of Genesis. So the poem retells the biblical story of Adam and Eve, explaining how they came to be created and how they fell from innocence and ended up losing their place in paradise. It also explains the origins of Satan, who was an angel in heaven known as Lucifer. Satan led his followers to a war against God, and due to their disobedience, Satan and his followers were expelled from heaven and sent to hell. As a revenge, Satan turned into a serpent to enter paradise and tempt Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, which was also eaten by Ädەm, causing man's downfall. So, as it was mentioned at the beginning, Paradise Lost was divided into 12 books, and the poem starts with the fall of the angels and a plan delivered by Satan to capture the newly created species by God. Paradise Lost is an epic poem that outlines biblical and historical subjects, dealing with themes such as the free will of the individual to choose between good and evil, choice that would define the separation between individuals and their link to God. Other themes that are dealt with throughout the poem are temptation and disobedience. For example, when Adam and Eve were tempted by Satan to disobey. Even though Adam and Eve were given freedom to choose and were also given the idyllic place to live, that was the Eden, they disobeyed one commandment and became ingrates. So we could also say that the poem deals with the idea of the hierarchical conception in which everything except God has a superior and everything except unformed matter has an inferior, and any failure in any part would bring terrible consequences. So throughout the poem, it is shown what caused the fall of man and the consequences upon the world. The poem is about epic loss, which was the loss of humanity's innocence. Paradise Lost is an epic poem because of the following elements. It follows the exploits of a hero or anti-hero. It involves warfare and the supernatural. It begins in the midst of the action, which earlier crises in the story brought in later by flashback. And it expresses the ideals and traditions of a people. The poem was written in blank verse, which is a non-rhyming verse, and was composed in the verse form of iambic pentameter, which means that a line is composed of 5 long unaccented syllables, each followed by a short accented syllable. It is important to bear in mind that this was against trifling literary conventions, since blank verse was restricted to the stages, and this type of metrical style was not accepted in heroic or epic English verse during that period. Paradise Lost is an epic poem that also contains elements of tragedy, such as the disobedience and consequently fall of mankind. So, how did Milton write Paradise Lost? First of all, it is important to know that it was probably written during the period in which Milton was completing his career as a political pamphleteer, and thus toward Restoration, to which he opposed, which occurred in 1660. So, as it was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, it was probably written between the years 1658 and 1663. From 1644 on, Milton's sight began to fail, and by February 1652 he had gone completely blind, possibly due to a cystic tumor of bichronic glaucoma. Something curious and at the same time admirable about the writing of Paradise Lost was that Milton, who at that time was a blind man, prearranged in his head every single line and phrase from the poem, making them fit meticulously into place. So he remembered and dictated every word of the poem to his secretaries. John Phillips, his nephew and pupil, would visit his uncle Milton to look over the manuscript to check punctuation and spelling. The reason why it was criticized was because critics had observed the portrayals that the portrayals of God and Satan were ambiguous, and because the portrayal of the thoughts and motivation of Satan casted him as if he was the hero of the poem, since he asserted his own freedom by reigning in hell. The speaking style and tone of the main speaker characters was also criticized. For example, the way in which God spoke towards Adam and Eve's ingratitude, inferring that God sounded like a headmaster or like a father or mother of a rival teenager at times. And some critics even found God's tone annoying. But despite these critics, this poem was and still is consensually considered to be the greatest of its kind. This is the end of my presentation. In this image, this slide, you can see the sources I consulted throughout the development of the analysis of the topics presented. So, thank you so much for your attention.